And welcome back, everyone. Today I played in the 11th round of the FIDE Candidates Tournament here in Madrid, Spain. Now, in this 11th round, I had the white pieces against Richard Rapport. Now, Richard had lost his last two games, so he's very unpredictable in terms of what I could expect. So let's jump right into it. So I start by playing e4, as I've played in every other game here so far. Richard plays c5, knight to f3. Now we get the first sort of little surprise with Richard playing knight c6. Now I decided to play d4. I could have played bishop b5, which is the Rossolimo as well, but I figured play the open Sicilian and see what happens. So we trade on d4, knight to f6 is played, and now I play knight to c3, and now Richard plays e5, which is the Sveshnikov Sicilian. So now I play knight b5, Richard plays d6, and here I thought for a bit, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of sort of chess psychology and sort of chess problem solving when you're surprised in the opening. So when Richard played d6, there were a couple things going through my mind. Now the first thing is that I could play bishop g5, which is the main line. Now at the same time, for whatever reason, I was sort of harkening back to my childhood here, and I almost played the move a4 here, because a4 is another variation which I looked at many years ago. There actually was this book called The Sveshnikov Sicilian by Neil MacDonald, a British grandmaster. It was published in the amazing year 1999, so it was a very, very, very long time ago, but I do remember that there were lines with a4, a6, knight a3, bishop g4, and it's probably fine for white. It's nothing special, but I thought it's a little bit too off the beaten path, so that's why I rejected a4. Now, the other option that I took quite a bit of time considering was the very topical line with knight d5, which has been played a lot recently. Now, the reason I did not play knight d5 is, first of all, Richard obviously had been preparing for this game. He was ready with the Sveshnikov, and I thought that even though it's very playable and it gets very sharp, so there can be many results, Richard is a player who likes dynamics, he likes tactical play, very sharp positions, and I thought the fact that Richard would be very happy here and it would be his kind of game was something I really wanted to avoid. So that's why I chose to play bishop g5. Now we got a6, knight a3, b5. Now I played knight d5 here, bishop takes f6, also another variation that's very sharp, but by this point I thought I would try to be slow and positional a la Magnus. So I play knight d5, bishop e7, I trade here, and now I took a bit of time before playing this move c3. Now I have played c4 quite a few times, including against Fabiano Caruana in the US Championship, but again, Richard was moving very quickly, so I knew he was prepared, so I thought I would do something different. So I played c3, rook b8, knight c2, bishop g5, and now I played this move g3. Now, my inspiration behind playing g3 is quite different. So again, in the late 1990s, early 2000s, I was studying the Sveshnikov. I actually played it right up until I became a grandmaster. And one of the players I played in many different tournaments was the Soviet-American grandmaster Sergei Kudrin. Now, I remember that when I played him or when I was studying for him for various tournaments in Las Vegas and other places around the country, he was somebody who always played the setup with c3 and g3 and bishop g2. So that was my inspiration behind this, is that I was harkening back 20 plus years to the Stone Age, back before I was a professional player, and I was just digging this out of my memory. So I played g3, castles, bishop g2. I also played it because it's very slow, not a whole lot is happening. And I knew Richard would be surprised as well. So a5, castles, and now he plays knight e7, and now I play knight e3. Richard plays bishop e6. I trade here on e7. He takes with the queen, and now I play knight to f5. Now again, one thing that's very important, and one of the reasons I played so slowly, is that Richard is a player who likes creative. He likes to be creative. He likes dynamic positions, and this is anything but dynamics. It's extremely slow, extremely dry, and not a whole lot is happening. So I figured if we're both a little bit unhappy, that's better than him being happy and me being unhappy, which is a large part of why I chose to play this line. So now Richard played queen d8. I played queen takes d6. He plays g6. Again, not a whole lot is happening, but I'm just hoping for a little bit of something. So now I trade on d8. By the way, it's worth noting that black does not want to take on f5, because after pawn takes, now I get these light squares and the diagonals open for my bishop. So for example, say he goes rook d8, I get bishop d5, b4, c4. There are ideas like h4, g4. The bishop is really, really good here in the center of the board, and white has a pleasant position, and I would have loved to have had this during the game, which is why Richard played queen d8, which is a smart move, because even though he gambits the pawn on d6, he's going to get some counterplay here after the move g6. I have to trade. I go h4 here, and now I play bishop f6, which really surprised me. I was expecting Richard to take, and after either f takes, I think f takes e4, bishop e4, rook d2. After b3, a4, I already thought the game was headed towards a draw, and that would have been all she wrote. I would have probably drawn this game in about 3 hours, and it would have been a very light recap. Instead, Richard plays this move bishop f6, which really took me aback, because now after knight e3, even though he's still getting counterplay, there are more pieces on the board, and I can go knight d5 or rook d1 later. So now I have to go b3. If I play rook b1 here, for example, I lose the pawn on a2. If I put the other rook on b1 here, I think black can play bishop e7 with the idea of bishop c5. And it's very tricky for white to play because even though you have an extra pawn on c3, the two bishops are very strong. Black is an active rook on the 7th rank here, and it feels very unpleasant for white to play. So instead I played b3. Now Richard plays a4, the very logical human move. He could have played bishop e7 as well again, but now after rook d1, if he trades on d1 and goes bishop c5, I have knight d5 here. If he plays rook d8 as well, I can just go knight d5. And now probably this still should be a draw for black, but white does have an extra pawn here. So Richard played a4, which I expected. Now I played rook d1. At this point, I sort of had resigned myself to the result, which I thought it would be a draw. But Richard keeps the game going. So we trade, everything comes off. I go rook b1, bishop a2, rook b2, bishop e6, and now I played bishop f3. Now the one little hope that I have here is that I can sort of trade off the light square bishops, and then maybe I can put my knight on d5. So in a perfect world, if I can get a position like, let's just say this, for example, with this great outpost on d5, white is doing really, really well here, and I'm going to have very good winning chances. So after bishop f3, I was sort of maybe like mildly optimistic I could get a little bit of something, but I didn't really expect to. But Richard took a lot of time here, and as he started thinking more and more, I became more optimistic because I realized that he was very unhappy with his position. So he goes bishop e7 here. Now I play bishop b4, bishop g4, trying to exchange the light square bishops. And now he took on g4, which really shocked me. Even here, I thought that if Richard had played a move like bishop c5, bishop takes e6, bishop takes e3, this should be a draw. If we trade the pawns here, again, even material, this should be quite simple. And if I go bishop c4, after a move like bishop c5, bishop b5, king g7, sure, I can play c4, and white has an extra pawn, but it's opposite color bishops here. And realistically, against a player of Richard's caliber, I should never get winning chances. So I was very shocked when he took, because now I suddenly realized it was game on. So I play knight takes g4, he goes b4 here, and now I made what I think was a mistake in retrospect. Maybe a mistake is too strong of a way of wording it, but I played this move h5, which leads directly to a forced endgame. Now what I could have done is I could have tried rook b3 here, but again, after bishop d6, there are maybe better chances to win here, although I still think that after takes, rook b4, takes, bishop b4, knight e5, f5, this still probably should be a draw, but in this endgame, at least there are 3 pawns on the board versus 2. Actually, I guess in the game it's 3 versus 2 as well, but maybe there are some chances here to win. Probably it's still a draw, but this is a better version than what I get in the game. Because after I played this move h5, which I was, or sorry, no, sorry, I did take, sorry, not h5, sorry. I took on b4. Now I'm losing my mind, as you guys can see. He plays rook b5, and now h5, this was my whole plan of what I was playing for, and I was very, very optimistic here, because if black takes, now I have knight h6, and knife to f5, or actually I think I was going to go rook c2 here. And again, with the knife getting to f5, the pawns are a little bit split here. There are going to be some serious chances to create complications, and I might be able to win the game. But the problem is that here black can now actually take on b4, and I do trade, and I take on g6, and I get a 3 versus 2, but the problem is this 3 versus 2 with the pawns connected, it should just be a draw with correct play, and Richard starts to defend amazingly well. So he goes bishop c3. Now I play this move, knight to d3, he goes f5, and now I play f3. Now one of the things that you have to do in endgames when you're trying to win, especially an endgame where it's like knight versus bishop, and it's not so much about precise calculation, but a setup and concepts, is try to figure out what are the setups where you can win. Now the first big question here is let's say we get this position after f5, which happens in the game. If I trade on f5, can I ever win here? Now the answer is no, and the main reason the answer is no is because I can never really push g4, because if I ever go g4 with just one pawn on the board, black can just yo-yo with the bishop forever and then sacrifice for the pawn. So I can't win this endgame if I take on f5. So what are the other setups I have? Now the 2 other setups I have, Well, actually, one setup I can do is I can go king g2, takes knight c5. But this setup as well is also just a draw with a 2 versus 1, because eventually we get to some position like this, and black again will wait forever, and this should be a draw. When I push f5, he trades, yo-yos, and sacks for the pawn on f6, just to illustrate the point. At some point, he'll take and basically just yo-yo forever. When I push, you sacrifice. So basically, I realized that this setup with a 2 versus 1 is going to be a draw. And I also realized that this 2 versus 1 is a draw as well. So what are the two other options I have? Now, the first option to consider is playing e5 here. But the problem after e5 is now black goes g5. I can play f4, but eventually black is just going to sit here. And again, there's nothing I can really do here. If I remove the knight, he sacrifices the bishop for the pawns. So this is also going to be a draw. So that means that 3 of the setups are just dead draws. So now there's one more setup that I foresaw, which is that I can play f3 like in the game. And there's one big hope that I have here, which is, let's say black trades. I'm going to start moving the bishop around. If I can ever get this knight to f3, for example, this is not knight h4, sorry. This probably is winning because the knight covers the entry squares on e5 and g5, and now I can sort of bring my king around, and at least I can hope for something where I can try to win the game. So therefore, having realized all the other setups were no good, I play f3, but unfortunately, as we see in the game, Richard just starts waiting. He's waiting for me to take, because as we realize, this is a draw. So now I play g4 again, trying to force black to split the pawns, and this way I can maybe hope one day to put a knight on f3. But Richard just plays accurately, just waits on d4. We play a bunch of moves. I'm not going to get into specifics. I just start moving the knight all over the board. And after many moves, we reach this position where Richard actually makes a big blunder here. He goes king e6. Now, actually, maybe saying a big blunder is too strong, but already here, if Richard goes king g5, this would have been a draw, because after pawn takes e5, f4, there's nothing white can do. If I go e6, he has king f6, e7, king f7, king d3, bishop c5, king e4, and black can actually take, because if I trade off on e7, after king f4, king f6, it's white's move. Black has the opposition, so this would be a draw. Whereas in the game after king e6, now I sort of start to rotate the knight around, and I go knight e3. And now Richard actually has to trade on e4. If he doesn't, I will take the pawn. And now I get my setup with a 2 versus 1. But unfortunately, even here, this still is just a draw, because I'm never able to get this knight to f3. Now, the one setup where white can win is, let me just set it up. The one setup where white can win here is this setup. Or actually, maybe this is a draw too. But this is the one setup where it gets very tricky. And now I have e5, king e4, knight d4. And this probably is, well, actually, it is just winning for white. So this is the one setup that is winning. But as long as black does not push the pawn to g5, I can never win. Additionally, I can never get my knight to f3, because the black king is simply too active here. So he goes king e5, I go king f3. Not knight c4 check, because initially you think, well, wait, white's just winning here, you're up a pawn in the end game. But after knight c4, black can take on e4, knight takes d6, king f4, and now black will capture the pawn on g4 or on g5, and the game will be a draw. So I go king f3, he goes king f6, and somewhere around here, I had a thought in my mind, which there was a tweet the other day from Anish Giri, where when I moved my knight to h1 against Fabiano, he said, you have 64 squares on the board, you use them all. And that sort of inspired me to start moving my knight all over the board to many different squares here. Now, it's worth noting that there really is nothing I can do in this game, so I'm not going to go too in depth on the moves here. There is one idea that I had, which I really wanted to play, which is I wanted to move king g2, but the problem is if I go king g2, black can again go king g5, and now if I go e5 takes e6, there's bishop d8. And the one setup that I was hoping I could get is this one, but even this setup with the knight on c4, after e5, bishop c7, this is still, I think, a draw, because black can just wait forever. Oh, maybe not. Actually, this one is winning. So this one is winning if I get knight d6, apparently. Aha. So if I could have gotten this setup, and this, by the way, was a setup that I wanted, there's maybe some chance to try, although apparently computer still says king h6, king g7 is a draw. But I really want the knight on c4, but the problem is I can never quite get it in the game, because he goes king g5, and if I go h3, then he gets in with king f4. So I can't quite get the setup with a knight. So after many more moves, I get essentially the same concept. Now, it's worth noting here, if I go g5, which is the other option, I put the pawn on a dark square, and after bishop e7, there's nothing I can really do here. If I go knight f4, we just swap the pawns, and this is, of course, just a draw, even though I have the e pawn. And if I go king e3, he just yo-yos between e7 and d8, and there's just nothing I can do because the pawns are simply too weak. So I play knight f4, and now I play knight d3, and finally I decide, okay, I'm going to go for the line that I mentioned before with e5, but the problem is with the knight on d3 versus c4, now there's really nothing I can do against black just waiting on the 2 squares, as Richard proves in the game. So I go king g3, bishop b8, king f3, and now bishop c7. Again, if my knight was on c4 and I could go knight d6, this would be winning, but alas, my knight is stuck on d3. So finally I go king e4, king g4, e6, bishop d8, knight b4, king g5, knight d5, and here I'm hoping for some kind of study where I can maybe run the king up, maybe something like this, for example, where if g5, king d7 wins the game because he has no squares on the diagonal. But Richard, of course, is having none of it, and he just goes bishop f6, which is just a sound move. Play e7, he takes, I take, and now I just decide to gobble the pawn so that all the people on YouTube and Reddit will be like, Hikaru couldn't win with an extra knight, he's so bad at chess. Anyway, we reach the final position after knight takes g4, and the game ends very peacefully in a draw after nearly 6 hours of play. So what to say? I got what I wanted. I played a very slow position, slow variation, just hoping for a very, very long game, maybe get some opportunities. I got an extra pawn, but unfortunately, due to Richard's fantastic defensive efforts, the game ended in a draw. So now I'm 2 points behind the leader, Jan Nepomniachtchi, who beat Ali Reza earlier today. I play Jan tomorrow with black pieces, so we'll see what happens. At any rate, I will keep the recaps coming, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you are not already subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button below, and we have a few more recaps, so I'll be back soon, you guys.